Welcome back to Global Current Lens, where headlines are decoded, strategies are exposed, and the truth about global events comes into focus. Tonight, a storm brewing in Washington, one that may ripple far beyond Capitol Hill. Former President Donald Trump has issued a stark warning. America must prepare for mass layoffs. His warning is tied directly to the current stalemate in Washington, where political gridlock has once again placed the stability of the government and, by extension, the economy at risk. The stakes are high, the rhetoric is sharp, and the consequences could reach into every corner of American life. To understand this unfolding drama, we must trace the immediate events, explanation, dig into the political history that set the stage, explore international reactions, weigh the economic and strategic stakes, explanation, and finally consider where this confrontation might lead. Quick context snapshot. The United States government is once again teetering on the edge of dysfunction. A deadlock over funding, policy disagreements, and partisan brinkmanship have combined to create the possibility of a shutdown. Government shutdowns are not new, explanation, but this one carries particular weight. At the heart of the dispute is not just the usual fight over spending, explanation, but a deeper struggle over political direction and the future of American governance. Former President Trump's intervention has escalated the narrative. His warning about mass layoffs reflects not just the potential consequences of a shutdown for federal workers, but the cascading effects across industries that rely on government stability, contracts, and consumer confidence. What began as legislative gridlock in Washington could soon translate into real economic pain for millions. To understand the scope of this crisis, explanation, we first need to examine the immediate event driving headlines. The immediate event, the current confrontation in Washington, is centered on government funding. Lawmakers have failed to agree on a budget or even a temporary stopgap measure. Without resolution, key federal agencies face closure. Explanation, leaving employees furloughed and essential services disrupted. Explanation. Former President Trump entered the conversation with his warning that Americans should prepare for massive layoffs. Explanation, his statement is not an official policy announcement, but rather a political framing of the potential fallout. Trump's words resonate because they draw attention to how government instability bleeds into the private sector. When a shutdown looms, explanation, federal employees face furloughs, but private businesses that depend on government contracts also feel the shock. Companies in defense, technology, and infrastructure often rely on timely payments and project approvals. If these grind to a halt, ripple effects can spread rapidly. Trucking companies may see delays in highway contracts. Aerospace manufacturers can face uncertainty in defense deals. Even small suppliers to federal agencies may suddenly find themselves without income. Markets react swiftly to this kind of political dysfunction. Explanation, investors often see a shutdown as a sign of weakness, not just in the government's ability to function, but in America's ability to project economic stability abroad. Explanation, this concern is magnified when the conflict appears more political than financial, when it is not a question of lacking money, but of refusing to compromise. Trump's decision to highlight mass layoffs is designed to amplify the stakes. By invoking the language of job loss, explanation, he shifts the narrative from abstract Washington gridlock to something every American can picture: empty desks, unpaid workers, and shrinking household budgets. This framing raises both alarm and urgency, ensuring that the story will not remain confined to political pages but will spill into economic, business, and even international discussions. Historical and political context. To fully grasp why this warning resonates, look at the history of shutdowns and stalemates in American politics. The U.S. has experienced more than 20 shutdowns since the modern budgeting process was introduced in the 1970s. Some were brief, lasting only a day. Others stretched for weeks, creating significant disruption. The longest shutdown in history occurred in late 2018 and early 2019, lasting 35 days. During that time, hundreds of thousands of federal workers went without pay. National parks closed, airports saw delays, and public services slowed to a crawl. Explanation, businesses tied to federal operations lost billions in revenue. Shutdowns are typically caused by disagreements over spending priorities, but in recent decades, they have increasingly reflected deeper political divides. These divides are not just about numbers in a budget, but about ideology, immigration, healthcare, taxation, explanation, military funding, and climate policy have all served as battle lines. The current stalemate reflects this evolution. Explanation, it is less about the immediate numbers and more about broader visions of governance. Trump's involvement adds another layer. Explanation: as a former president and a leading political figure, his warnings echo within the Republican Party and beyond. Explanation: they remind audiences of his populist framing, casting government dysfunction as a threat to ordinary workers rather than as a matter confined to bureaucrats in Washington. This moment also fits into a larger global trend. Around the world, governments are experiencing increasing polarization. From Europe to South America, political gridlock has disrupted economies, created social tension, and weakened trust in institutions. The U.S. is not alone in facing these crises, explanation, but because of its economic and strategic weight, its shutdowns carry outsized consequences. Global reactions: while a shutdown is technically a domestic event, explanation, the world pays attention. America's economy is deeply intertwined with global markets, and any signal of instability resonates abroad. Financial markets in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East watch Washington closely. A prolonged shutdown could shake investor confidence, leading to volatility in currencies, stock exchanges, explanation, commodities. For example, the U.S. dollar often acts as a safe haven in times of uncertainty, but if the uncertainty originates within the U.S. itself, that trust can erode. Allies worry about the perception of America's reliability. If the government cannot keep itself open, can it be counted on to fulfill international commitments? Military alliances, trade agreements, and diplomatic negotiations all depend on an image of stability. A shutdown, even if temporary, creates doubts. Rivals and competitors view such dysfunction as an opportunity. Explanation: governments in Beijing or Moscow may point to America's stalemate as evidence of democratic weakness. Propaganda outlets often seize on shutdowns to argue that Western systems are chaotic, unable to deliver basic governance compared to more centralized models. Global institutions also feel the effects. The International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and United Nations all interact with U.S. officials and depend on American funding. Delays in decision-making or payments ripple through these organizations, creating secondary challenges. Thus, Trump's warning about mass layoffs resonates not only at home but also abroad. Investors, allies, and rivals alike are recalibrating their expectations of American stability. Economic and strategic stakes. The stakes of this crisis stretch far beyond Washington. Hallways at their core are both economic and strategic concerns. Economically, explanation: the first victims are federal employees, hundreds of thousands who may be furloughed or forced to work without pay. But the impact does not stop there. Businesses dependent on federal spending, from contractors building highways to firms conducting scientific research, suddenly face uncertainty. Consumer confidence, already fragile, takes another hit. When people fear for their jobs or their paychecks, they spend less, and the slowdown feeds on itself. Strategically, explanation: the United States risks projecting weakness. Defense readiness can be affected if civilian employees at the Pentagon are furloughed. Diplomacy suffers when State Department operations slow. Even intelligence gathering can face disruptions if analysts are sidelined. Explanation: competitors may use this window to press advantages, assuming American policymakers are distracted or constrained. The economic stakes also tie directly into broader global conditions. At a time when the world is facing high interest rates, fragile supply chains, explanation: geopolitical instability, from wars in Eastern Europe to tensions in the Pacific, the perception of an unreliable U.S. government compounds uncertainty. Mass layoffs points to the potential for a domino effect. If federal workers stop receiving pay, local businesses near military bases, government offices, or national parks lose customers. If contractors are forced to cut back, private sector layoffs may follow. Uncertainty seeps into every level of the economy, from Wall Street to small-town diners. The strategic stakes are equally profound. The nation allies count on America for leadership, and adversaries look for moments of weakness. A prolonged stalemate signals that internal division may be America's greatest vulnerability. Possible futures. The future of this crisis remains uncertain, but three broad scenarios can help frame the possibilities. Scenario 1, de-escalation. In this outcome, lawmakers reach a compromise before the shutdown causes severe damage. Perhaps a short-term funding bill is passed, buying time for negotiations. Explanation: this path minimizes disruption. Federal workers avoid long furloughs, markets regain confidence, and global partners breathe easier. Yet, even in this optimistic scenario, the underlying divisions remain unresolved, setting the stage for future clashes. Scenario 2, limited conflict. Here, a shutdown does occur, but it is relatively short, lasting days or weeks rather than months. Federal employees face temporary hardship, markets wobble, but the system absorbs the shock. The disruption is real but not catastrophic. This scenario aligns with many past shutdowns, explanation, where political theater eventually gives way to compromise once public pressure grows. However, limited shutdown carries lasting consequences for trust in institutions and faith in governance. Scenario 3: escalation. This is the most severe path. Drags on for weeks or longer, crippling government functions. Mass layoffs, as Trump warned, should spread from federal workers to contractors and ripple into the private sector. Consumer confidence collapses, markets slide, and international partners question America's stability. Adversaries may seize the moment to press geopolitical advantages, testing U.S. resolve abroad. Explanation. The damage could extend well beyond the shutdown, reshaping the economic and political landscape for years. These scenarios are not predictions but frameworks. They highlight the range of possible futures and the stakes of the choices being made right now in Washington. Tension peak and big question. The tension is clear. Explanation. On one side stands a government at risk of paralysis, unable to reconcile its divisions. Explanation. On the other stands the economic and strategic weight of a nation whose influence stretches across the globe. At the center, millions of workers, federal employees, contractors, and private citizens. Wait to see if their paychecks, their businesses, and their futures will be collateral damage in a political struggle. Trump's warning forces the issue into sharper relief. By framing the stalemate in terms of mass layoffs, he reminds Americans that this is not an abstract fight. It is about jobs, livelihoods, and stability. The big question remains, will Washington find a way to govern? Explanation. Or will political dysfunction push the world's largest economy into crisis? The standoff in Washington is more than a budget battle. It is a test of governance, and of economic resilience, and America's ability to project stability in an uncertain world. Whether this crisis resolves quickly or escalates into something deeper, explanation, its consequence will not stop at the borders of the United States. They will ripple outward, shaping markets, alliances, and the balance of global power. As always, explanation, we will continue to follow developments and bring clarity to the noise. If you found this analysis valuable, explanation, consider subscribing to Global Current Lens and sharing your thoughts in the comments. How do you believe this crisis will end? With compromise, with conflict, explanation, or with long-lasting damage? Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep your eyes on the current shaping our world.